so much. And we have wonderful bites, so please do enjoy and eat. But good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you tonight and to celebrate the work. Thank you. Yes, good evening. To celebrate the work of the Center of Fiction, one of Brooklyn's cultural treasures. As COFO of Brooklyn Org, I'm proud to support organizations like the Center that bring people together through the power of story. Their commitment to uplifting writers, building community, and making literature accessible is something we're truly fortunate to have right here in Brooklyn. At Brooklyn Org, we champion this borough, its brilliance and resilience, its culture and grit. And most of all, we're about celebrating and honoring our Black women. Thank you. Tonight embodies that spirit, a celebration of literature, yes, but also a space for meaningful dialogue and reflection. When Honorée Fanonne Jeffers writes, she captures the fullness of Black women's lives, our refusal to be subjugated, and our ability to look death or any weak adversary in the face and say, go find somebody else's house. In this space, we're here to honor the release of her powerful new book, Misbehaving at the Crossroads, a work that challenges, resonates, and reminds us all to listen more deeply and let Black women tell our stories. Thank you for being here and for supporting this essential work. And now, please join me in welcoming our featured authors, Honorée Fanonne Jeffers and Imani Perry, to the stage.
Of people up in here.
Good evening.
Good evening, I think.
Is your mic on?
Is it?
Yes. Yes,
on.
ma'am.
Okay.
Well, I just want to begin by saying this is an absolutely extraordinary book. It is beautiful. It is brilliant. And I probably have been a fan of Honorée's for longer than all of y'all. Because
really?
Outlandish Blues.
Really?
That was the beginning. I used to teach your work in the law school.
Really?
Yes. So.
Well, I've been a fan since Vexy Fine.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. But I wanted to start by talking about what you do in this book. There's this moment, and this one of the things you do is you'll be like, humble and self-deprecating, and then just be unbelievably brilliant. And so you do this thing where you're like, you refer to someone else as a real historian.
Jennifer L. Morgan.
Yeah. She's a phenomenal historian, but there's so much detailed historical research, and I was trying to think about how to describe your method. So, because this book is actually a 400-plus year history of Black women, it is a history of the women in your family. It's a personal history, but then it also engages all of the various kinds of storytelling. There's poetry in it. There's memory in it. There is meditation. There's your mother's voice in it, which I want to come back to. And so here's the analogy that I'm thinking about. I think that Honorée Jeffers is to history as roots music is to country. And what I mean is that what roots music, country is a particular genre that it came, associated with the Opry and and it pruned all of these ways of singing, and it has its own disciplines, but it leaves out a lot. Roots music is the sort of expansive kind of storytelling of people who
Y'all hear this?
are close to the land.
Y'all hear the renowned Imani Perry breaking it down. I just had to say that.
Okay.
Keep on going.
But a story about that keeps intact all the ways of knowing. And so I just want to hear you talk a little bit about your decision to be that kind of storyteller, to be in the archives, to do all the citation, and also to sing in the ways that come from the tradition.
So one of the things that's really important to me as I'm writing a book, probably because so many writers, particularly Black women writers, and James Baldwin, right, really shaped me. I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the ways that thought partners, as my brilliant editor and dear friend, where are you, Sarah? Okay, talks about it. And so, is Liz Van Hoos here? Okay, so Liz Van Hoos really cracked the code of love songs, okay? And I hope I'm not rambling too much, but I remember, this was before I met her, Sarah and I talked about, we were both, this was maybe year 6, we were both too close to the novel. Okay. And it was maybe like the 5th or 6th draft, right? This was when it was like 400 and something pages. So Sarah brought in Liz, who is not a Black woman, but who is one of these, I'm in New York, so I think I can be honest, these extraordinary white women who is really, really really knows Black literature. Yeah. And I remember Liz saying something to me that really blew my mind. She said, Love Songs was like a Kara Walker silhouette come to life. Ooh. And that is, I think, the first time that I really realized, oh, okay, maybe I can, do this. You know what I mean? So then what happened was, I was really struggling with Misbehaving at the Crossroads, because the first version of the book that was proposed was really just a loose collection of essays about Black feminism, and it was really like dry, not sexy at all, right? But I wanted that contract, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, I got bills, you know what I mean? So I started trying to figure it out, right? And I kept coming back to 2 people, Elizabeth Key, Grinstead, and great-grandma Mandy, okay?
Can I just say I have a great-grandma Mandy, too?
For real?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Exactly, you know what I'm saying? And so Mama would talk about great-grandma Mandy all the time. Every time, before we became estranged, every time she would say something that great-grandma Mandy. The big one is, you gotta start out with what you can hold, right? Which means, to me, you teach people how to treat you. If they keep violating your boundaries, hey, Jane, if they keep violating your boundaries, they're gonna, so you've got to stop people in their tracks, right? I love that Black woman's, thank you, whoever made that sound. So there were all of these things. And I was really confused as to how I was going to, braid together the history that very few of us know, okay? There are people who think they know African American women's history. But there's like a handful of us, me, you, maybe 20 other people, and I'm being really serious because when we think of Black women's history, it's always connected to Black men.
Right, this adjacent history.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's that point in that second essay, Our Fathers Who Rewrote Our Mothers, where I stop and I talk about Bacon's Rebellion,
Yes.
because everyone talks about this is when the concept of race became solidified and da-da-da-da, but no one ever talks about, except Jennifer L. Morgan, except the great Hortense Spillers, about partis sequitur ventrum.
Yeah.
It's like they don't even know it exists. So I was trying to figure out.
You tell folks what that is.
So partis sequitur ventrum. So before because it's Elizabeth Key.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Key, this is why I'm not a historian, 1656, I think that's the year. She had one child, I think at that time, by a white man who was a former indentured servant. She was a biracial Black woman. Her father had basically sold her, let's just be honest, into an indenture, but her indenture was only supposed to last 9 years, okay? This is in Virginia. And which Virginia really set the tone for all of, the slaveholding states. So whatever happened in South Carolina, whatever happened in Georgia, all of this is coming back to Virginia. So 9 years, and that was supposed to be the end of her indenture. 25 years later, Elizabeth Key Grinstead is still an indentured servant, and the first man who had her indenture had sold her to another man, and then that man had sold her to somebody else. So really, it became not only about her freedom, but what was going to happen to this child that she had had by this former indentured servant, by this white man. So she sues for her freedom, and she doesn't say, it's about my indenture and this isn't right and da-da-da-da. Her justification is, I am a Christian because my daddy was a Christian, okay? So after, I guess it was about 2 years, 3 years, something like that, right? She finally wins her freedom. But 4 years later, Virginia comes up with a law that is later called partis sequitur ventrum. Offspring follows belly. It's really a barnyard term. And that's where we get that a child follows the status of the mother. So Black women really created new enslaved people with their bodies, okay? And then we've got all of this other stuff happening where they're talking about how ugly we are and how we, don't have natural feelings for our children. And so there's all of this. This is what separates Black women from white women. And forever in this country so far, right. Yeah.
And what's so phenomenal about the way, though, that you do this is you're telling the history, but you're also giving your reader access to all of this academic sort of scholarly work that is essential, that it becomes, there's a clarity to it that comes through the way that you tell stories. Right, so that the relation, you actually make clear the relationship between the theoretical work and the stories.
Because let me say this, I felt like one of the biggest things, and I remember this during the Age of Phyllis when I was writing the Age of Phyllis, there always seemed to be this idea that, from white academics, and a few black folks, right? But mostly white. Stay in your lane. We got this. But then when you would be trying to have conversations with regular black people, they didn't know any of this.
Right.
And so my attitude is, I remember when, someone and then we're going to get back to Liz Van Hoos, when somebody called my work accessible. In poetry circles, to call someone's work accessible is to talk about their mama. Okay, your work isn't. But see, the way that I came up through the word, if you couldn't read your poetry at Mount Calvary Baptist Church, right, it didn't matter. The people needed to know. So I was thinking, who could be a bridge between the academics and the regular people? Because people need to know, so that when now we have our heads constantly on swivel, right, with what's going on. This is not new.
Right.
And this is a continuum. This is not, and also understand that, yes, it's morally wrong, but this is about money. And this is about keeping a class, an underclass, for these white men. This is why Bacon's Rebellion was such a pivotal moment, because it was a moment where poor white men, working class white men, and black men joined together. They can't have that.
Right.
And then Robin D.G. Kelly talks about in the 1930s when the Communist Party was trying to join black and white sharecroppers. Right. So every single time that we have had some kind of interracial movement, Obama. Y'all Negroes done got a little bit too sassy here, right? So we're gonna whip up, Bubba and the gang and tell them, what have they gotten? Now they Social Security about to get cut off, now whatever, and they still stupid because a rat always got to be better than a roach, okay? So that is... I cut that line out of Love Songs because I was like, is that rude? But it's true. A rat always got to be somebody. You got to have somebody that you looking down on, right? So the whole thing about, when I come back to Liz Van Hoos, what happened was I took over Mama's care. Mama and I had been estranged, and I can't go into, for legal reasons, what happened, but Medicaid, Medicare would not pay for her. Yeah. And so I walk into the hospital after I've been having these dreams. We've been estranged for 5 years. I haven't spoken to her for 5 years. And they tell me, she needs to be in the nursing home. She is rapidly declining, and she needs, hospice care, but it's like $9,000 a month. Now, in the Deep South, you can't be telling these white folks, I got savings, right? So I lied to them that I was taking it out of my retirement fund. And I'm a deeply faithful person, and what I know is what happened with Miss Oprah was a moment for a time such as that, because I wouldn't have had the money. Right. And so I just instantly said, I'm gonna pay for it, right? And it was weird because I had all this anger and pain. And then I was just like, and I remember at her homegoing and people saying to me, well, Lord gonna give it back to you. And I said, well, if he don't, I can move on, because this was my mama, right? And I loved her. But so after she passed away, notions of motherhood became even more resonant to me. But then it was just like, I was just like, how am I going to reconcile? I had a conversation with Lydia's. We were supposed to meet for 90 minutes. We met nearly 3 hours over Zoom. And she said, this is about great-grandma Mandy. This is about the matriline. And you're going to find your way through. This is the same, I mean, she said all kinds of stuff, but you're going to find your way through. And that's when I began to look at Elizabeth Key as a metaphor, right? Because as you know, there are ancestors of our bloodline, and then there are ancestors that we claim because of linked fate, right? And so, but then there's that tragedy that Elizabeth Key's descendants end up being white male slaveholders, you know? But for me, my question was, what happened to her mama? Because she's not named, she never names her. Even when they're talking about her mom, they only say her mother, but I need to go back because I own, I went to thrift book. You know how it is. You're like, you can look it up, but I need to have it, I need to be able to, eat French fries over it or whatever, And so they don't really refer to her. And I know that was, a strategy, but it's sad. It's sad that we never know. Was she still alive? Has she died? What was going on, And the other thing is, when I think about my own history, most Black people's history, we can, if we're descendant from the Middle Passage, we can only go back to 1870. And so which to me was a great, wondrous thing that I found Clarissa Napier, great-grandma Mandy's mom, but then I have no one before that.
You have a way, though, of...
Does somebody have some Kleenex? Because I feel something coming on. Go on ahead.
This is the sort of perennial question, right, of what to do with the names we don't know.
Thank you, sister. Thank you so much.
The stories that and I am deeply moved by your response to that, because you don't just repeat the silences. You do incantations. You say things like, isn't this sad? You conjure up, right, even without the names. This is why, I think the poetry in this book has, and same thing with Love Songs, it has this, there's a quality that is deeply spiritual that feels to me more truthful than just focusing on what the records don't have.
Well, that's the whole thing about rememory.
Yeah, that's
right. About Toni Morrison's theory of rememory, and I knew. I said, well, I'm gonna have to pay for this one word, and I'm good with that. I'm good with that because I needed that. But I think also, like me, you were someone who has been called to tend ancestral altars, and in our community, the work isn't dry. I cite Ashley Farmer's groundbreaking essay. She might have even been in graduate school when she wrote that, Archiving While Black.
Yeah.
And, knowing that for us, this is not a dry academic exercise. This is blood. This is spirit.
Yeah.
And this is why, I do feel called to do this work, because I know that we're gonna with the way that they are trying to erase us and erase the history, you know, we gonna have to really, like, you know, Mr. Miri used to say, it's nation time, you know? And so, you know, yes, but I think that was the thing with Mama. When Mama would tell, I took this out of Love Songs too, this was a fictionalized version of what Mama would do. But when she would talk about things that happened in history, she would say, you were my baby. Yeah. Or she would say,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or she would say, Valjean, that's my oldest, Valjean was my baby. Mm-hmm. Or Cece was walking.
It's how to keep time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because for us, it's not just on the page, right? But I remember when she talked about when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and she said, you hadn't yet started walking. She said, and I wanted to go to the funeral, but what was I going to do with my baby? You know, those sort of things. So for us, the memory is, you know what I mean? Like when I think about Crispus Attucks being the first to fall in the Boston Massacre, and the irony of, they were keeping us enslaved, and this black man still was fighting for freedom. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then I think about, did he love somebody? Did he have children? Where are they? Yeah. You know, all of that. Like I do, I think about when I say I'm greedy for what I'm owed. Yeah. You know, we are owed this. Yeah. You know, and if we can't get it, we can't get it the legal way. We gonna get it the spiritual way. You know what I mean?
Amen. Yeah. I wanna, that deserves an applause.
I just can't tell you what this conversation means to me. I know I'm just all weepy and my makeup looking crazy.
No, you look beautiful.
But it really does, because you know, I feel like I finally found a community, you know, after I took that Underground Railroad out of University of Oklahoma.
That's in the book too.
Okay, I took that Underground Railroad out of it, but you know, I've always wanted, I mean, I think every artist, because your work is more than academic writing. No, it's art. It's art.
No, absolutely.
Every artist wants to be acknowledged by their peers, you know, and
seen.
And I think what was so interesting was I worked so hard to be seen by white academics, and then I realized I never would be. That was the thing with The Age of Phyllis. I remember going through, you know, people using my work for a call for their papers. And then I emailed them and said, would you like a piece from me for your special edition? And they said no. They had a line from my poem in they call for paper and all the themes from my book.
That's a mess.
And you know I had that essay with all them notes in Chicago. Yeah. And you know Chicago is not easy.
No, not at all.
Okay, and I thought, oh, they're never going to accept me because they still think they own us. They still think they own us. And I said, well, I'm done. And so then they come, you know, they'll email, we would love to, and I'm like, delete. We would love, I'm delete. I'm like, y'all ain't paying no money. All you can offer me is respect. And if you cannot respect what I've done, you know, like I tell people all the time, you didn't meet me in no Popeyes, okay? You know, so if you can't respect what I've done, but then I realized there's a whole lineage of Black people who did this kind of work, and I just need to lean into my community.
Yes, that's right.
And that's what I got to do.
That's right. So I want to ask you though about the point about lineage, because there's a lot of things that I do want to say about this book. One is I love the fact that there are multiple Souths in it. Like you show the complexity of the different types. It's rural, urban, right? Upper South, the deep South, right? All of these things. You talk about the politics of gender, of bodies, of color, of various kinds of class, genealogies. You also come from two artists. And you do something that is, and I don't want to say the word courageous because it irritates me when people tell me that my writing is courageous, because I don't.
It is.
But what I mean is that there is, when you were writing with these sort of the people at your back or that came before, there's this pressure to have a certain kind of sanitized version of the story.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't do none of that.
No, but and it's scary.
Yeah,
because
right?
I remember, and I ain't gonna name no names, but I would encounter people who knew Daddy's work, or friends of his, when I started to talk about the fact that he had intimately abused me as a child, and they were angry.
They were.
They were very, very angry. And my thing was, well, he's dead now. So, at least I waited to do that, right? But there is, like, first of all, Daddy was from the upper Black bourgeoisie. Okay? His family papers are in the Moreland Spingarn collection at Howard with all that entails, okay? His grandfather was the first Black football player at University of Nebraska, and his grandfather was a doctor. His great-grandfather was a doctor, and then the white man, great-great-grandfather was a doctor, right? Very fair-skinned, all of that. Mama, very dark brown skin, full African features, came from not even working class, poor, po with an apostrophe, right? And I think they were both seeking something. Mama was seeking, but Mama used to say dark-skinned men wouldn't even look at her. So it was always light-skinned men, and that's how she ended up with Daddy. She was also very young. She was 25. He had been divorced twice, the whole thing. And I think with Daddy, it's really interesting because the whole Black is Beautiful thing I got from Daddy, right? And that is weird to be of his class, right? All of that. But the fact that I know he married Mama so he could have brown children. There was something that he had a real issue. So they both had issues. She had issues with the fact that her own mother would say she was ugly. Like, I remember sitting in Grandma's living room. And you remember how they used to have a plastic
on the furniture and down on the floor when you walk up the walkway.
There was like a little walk-up thing, and you had to come. And what was really disturbing to me for many years, I was Grandma's twin. And siblings of Mama were hostile towards me. And it took me years to realize that they had not dealt with the fact that she had abused them. And I looked exactly like her. just different. Her hair was a little straighter or whatever, but I remember I had gone down probably about 20 years ago, and I was sitting on the front porch, and this woman nearly ran out the road. And she got out her car and ran up, and she said, "God, I thought you was Miss Flon sitting on that front porch, right?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." But I remember sitting as a little girl, and Mama, this is your mother. You know, you share her blood, you share her flesh, you have drunk her milk. And Grandma saying, I was talking to, let's just say Floretta the other day, and she said, "Trail sure is ugly. Ha, 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 ha." And, you know, for Black women, I won't say all of us, I think I shed so many tears now because I couldn't express my pain except through anger, okay? And Mama was all angry, but now as a woman grown, I know it must have hurt because she talked constantly about Grandma those last weeks and how mean she was, you know? And Mama said, "Mama, you sound stupid," right? And she sort of twisted her mouth. But even as a little girl, I was like, that is the meanest thing to say to somebody, especially because I thought Mama was pretty. I remember she used to wear her hair in these cornrows, and then sometimes she wear these African outfits, and these Miss Lucille Clifton talked about how they used to wear these long earrings. Yeah. And I was just like, that's bizarre, right? So there was a class thing, there was a colorist thing, and they were both, I think, seeking something. Mama wanted her children to move forward, and it was very disturbing to her that we never wanted to be with Black bourgeoisie men. You know, it was very disturbing to her, right? You know, the crack dealers I dated in college. Right? So there was all of that, right? And so, but yeah, it was a tug of war, right? And I realized, like, if people recognize that in love songs, it's, you know, people are like, "Oh, this is your family." And no, this is the Black community. There's this thing where even Black bourgeoisie, really light-skinned Black people, still feel the need to perform a particular kind of Blackness to prove that they're real.
Down.
That they're down and they're real Black, but then they won't date nobody that's darker than a brown paper bag, that you can't pull, you know, a comb through, and you're just like, what is happening here? So there's all of that, you know, and it really played out. Like, I remember in Durham, and Durham was like uber Black bourgeoisie, right? And Daddy was an alpha, but he ran from the alphas, and they were always coming after him. Bruh Lance, come to the fraternity, whatever. He's like, "I don't want to be bothered with that shit, you know, that classist shit," right? And then there was this one guy, Daddy couldn't stand him because he had quote unquote good hair. And when you would see him in the morning when he would like get his paper, he was wearing a stocking cap
on his head.
All right. And that was back when everyone had afros, right? And Daddy was just so contemptuous of that, right? But, you know, I just remember you would see very dark brown-skinned men with very light-skinned women. Yeah. You would never see a light-skinned man married to a dark brown-skinned woman. And it was always interesting to me. You know, I'm very brown, but when I was with Mama, because of my hair, people would sort of challenge her. Is her father white? Especially Cece. Cece was really light-skinned, really light-skinned. When I was with Daddy, there was no challenge. There was no challenge. So it was, it was the whole politics of respectability
And it's politics of respectability in multiple ways, because there's it's the sort of black bourgeoisie politics of respectability. Then there's also the black power politics of respectability, which has which people don't
and it was
talk about.
so confusing.
Yeah,
it was so confusing, and the way that I remember, there's one guy who's living, I'll tell you his name later. Okay. He and people would just pop up at our house, just drive down to Durham, and Daddy would bring them to the house, and Mama would, he'd walk in the house, hey, Charlie, da-da-da-da, and Mama would be like mumbling, what do you think I'm supposed to feed them? And she's like, pulling stuff out of nowhere, doing whatever. That is very much, and people still, up until, a lot of these people have passed away, would talk about Mama's meals to me. I remember when we came, and I'm thinking, but did you ever stop to think how selfish that was? She had 3 children, and one of them was a little girl. I was her baby, and you're just gonna pop up like nothing. And I remember, I don't talk badly about him, but I remember my ex-husband, doing that.
And you did talk about
I didn't talk about how he would bring
No, it's true. You didn't talk
over
about that.
to and I would just let him go hungry. And he said, Sonna, in Willow, Sonna, you could have made some poulet. You could have made some yassa. I said, I could, but I'm not going to, because I don't know these strange people. And once you feed somebody, they gonna keep coming back.
That's true.
But that was very, and so she would just be smiling, and then she would do all of this black power, stuff behind the scenes, and then he would come and read his poetry, and no one ever told her thank you. No one ever told her thank you. So yes, there is that politics of respectability for Black women. The Black bourgeoisie, you're supposed to do your sorority work, you're supposed to do, I remember Mrs. Cook, who was a legend in Durham. She was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. She was also a member of the Links. I think she had founded the Links chapter. She was my piano teacher or whatever. And so there were these sort of club things that you did, right? And then there were the things you did for the movement. And the way that all of that was taken for granted.
Yeah. Do you, your mother's voice is in this book, and your caretaking is in this book, and is that for you a way of thanking her?
Oh, yeah. Because that's the thing, even with all that happened, and I talk about the fact that she suffered from addiction, and so when she was saying she didn't remember, she really didn't remember, and that only happened a few months. I realized, how you keep something in the back of your mind, and then all of a sudden the memory just come to the front of your mind, right? So there's that, but there's also, I remember Mama being at Talladega College when I was at Talladega College, and most of these people had passed away. There was not one woman who was tenured. And Mama went off one day, And that's how Miss Mary Jones became tenured. Okay? And so she would I remember this one girl was assaulted by a group of guys from a particular fraternity. I won't say which one. They were not alphas, okay? And a group of guys, and she had been in the boys' dorm, the male dormitory, you know, after hours or whatever, because you had to, you know, this is, you know, we don't understand that in the 21st century, but you had to sign in and the whole thing, and everybody knew your business and, you know, whatever. And they tried to expel this girl who had been gang assaulted and didn't want to do nothing to the boys. It was smoke in the city by the time Trilla Lee got done with them. And she would do these sort of things, you know, and really paid a price. People would, you know, because, you know, with a lot of folks, I'm just talking about our community, if they don't like what you're doing, they'll look at your physicality and find, oh, she black and ugly, she this and the other. Now she's a legend. Now people come up. I remember when Dr. Jeffers wrote me that letter and I got into medical school, and there's one guy told me that he found out the reason he hadn't been getting into medical school is because one of his professors was writing his letters of recommendation on notebook paper with pencil. And then Mama wrote the letter, and then he is a physician right now, right? So there was all of that. And so I learned, you know, like, but that's what I struggled with. I learned what private weakness was. You know what I mean? And what you know, I was lying about being a feminist. You know, I was, oh, come on, you know. And I know so many black women feminists who are like that in their personal life.
Right, the layers of, underneath.
And then, you know, of course you get the men. You start trying to talk about your pain, you know, and they'll be like, you know, it's hard being a black man. And I'm like, how the hell did we get here? I'm talking about me. I'm talking about being sexually harassed, and now you won't talk about the police, and I'm confused, right? So there's all of that, but there's that private weakness that I struggled with, okay? But that public fight, and that was Mama. If somebody was doing you wrong at Talladega, they would come to Mama. People would send them to Mama. And Mama would feed people. And this was before, you know, creepy people took over academia, right? But when they couldn't go home for the holidays because they either didn't have the money or they weren't getting along with their family, I would wake up on Thanksgiving and somebody would be walking out in the bathroom and, you know, and all of that, right? I learned how to fight from her. And one of the reasons that I was insistent on having that essay by her is because I wanted people to see the balance, because human beings are balanced.
And complicated.
They're very complicated, you know, and I really didn't understand Sister Imani until I was deep in academia. How afraid I was all the time, and how even though she was so bold, she was afraid.
Yeah.
All the time. And how she was negotiating that fear. And it wasn't a physical fear. It was the fear of constant humiliation. When you're trying to figure out your self-esteem and you almost got it, and then somebody come up in there and, you know, like I mean, I'm being honest, I ain't naming no names, but I asked, you know, the powers that be at my school, How many more wars do I have to win to get a raise? I'm the lowest paid full professor and the first black professor, not black female, black in the history. It took Oprah Winfrey calling. It took Oprah Winfrey. That's like Black Jesus calling you for me to get a raise. And I was just like, and they would say little things. I remember this one guy who's now retired, and, because I've always been really sensitive about, I don't know, like, post-structuralist theory, right? So I asked him, I said, can you come up with a little syllabus for me so I could read? And he said, oh, don't worry about that. Just go shopping. This was after I had won the National Endowment for the Arts. This was after I had won the Whitter Benner. This was after, and it was just constant humiliation, and I was afraid all the time.
Right.
All the time, because you'd be sitting up thinking, okay, now they're gonna like me. Now they're gonna respect me. Now they're gonna do this. Now they're gonna do, and then I was deep in my 50s when I was like, Honorée, you can't achieve out of white supremacy. These people gonna be whoever they gonna be, okay? And so that's when, I remember when, I was threatening to retire, and I told somebody, I said, I will eat gluten-free crackers and peanut butter for the rest of my life before I will let these people. And I was laughing with my agent friend, Sarah. I said, I am so fond of saying, I was nominated for a literary prize in France, I was like, but that, that's when I realized it's time to retire. It's time to retire because they remember when I allowed them to push me around. And they're never going to forget it.
Yeah.
They're never going to forget it, and it doesn't matter what I do. They're going to try to pull me back here. And I'm like, and you were not going to do that. And so I said, it's scary,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have questions from the audience? Someone is coming with the mic.
Yes.
Someone up here.
Thank you for this discussion and for the book. Can you talk to us about the cover art, which is so striking?
Well, that is the great Elizabeth Catlett. And Sarah and I, my agent, we love Elizabeth Catlett. And I knew that I wanted something by Elizabeth Catlett. And so there were other pieces that, I was considering, but, they don't license everything. Otherwise, it becomes commonplace, So when I saw that piece, which I knew, I was like, oh, thank God, they'll. And what I love about it is these three richly hued Black women, and the woman in the middle actually resembles my mama, right? Yeah. And so then I'm the only one that's left. I'm the baby. And Val is gone and Cece is gone. And so I thought, these are my women. And I love that. Because you know what I'm talking about when in the South, and sometimes I see it even up north, you'll have grandmas or even moms, and they're not Black women, they're not holding the hand, they hold on to the wrist.
My mother did that the day before yesterday.
They hold on to the
right
wrist.
Here.
You ain't going nowhere. And I think of this as an ancestral legacy. Oh. My children will not be taken from me.
Yeah.
Right? So when you see her and, I'm like, it reminds me, because Mama would be like, where you think you going?
Right.
Right. You know, so yes, so the Elizabeth Catlett, and I always want to, I know that, aside from me and Sister Imani and maybe a few other people, but I'm honest about my audience is Black women. I think people feel like, that doesn't mean I don't want everybody to read the book, but when you have a perfect reader in your head, that's what I loved about Liz, even though Liz was not a Black woman. She knew, you're writing this, right? So when I'm speaking, but there are two things that I think, and this is, I think, connected to the artwork. There are two things that I'm doing. I'm writing directly to Black women, but I'm also letting white people know this is one of the few Black people who is not going to cater to your need to be lied to. You need to know the truth. You need to know what we're saying when you are not in the room. And so that, to me, also that direct stare, that unapologetic, this is a Black woman. Because I played so many games. I played so many games, tap dancing, and it still didn't get me the National Book Award for The Age of Phyllis. And so I was like, no, I'm good. But I was just like, wow, I have played every single game there is. And this has not gotten me what I wanted in poetry. And so now it's just straight no chaser. And so then I want Black women to see this Black woman, these Black women on the cover and be like, yeah, girl. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because don't nobody love you like a Black woman. Don't nobody love you like a Black woman. Don't nobody support you like a Black woman. I was in D.C. and I had my dress on. I'm finally showing my fat arms, right? I'm like, these my arms, okay? It's hot. And I was walking through the lobby, and you know what I'm about to say. And this sister said, okay, dress.
That's right.
And I was like, yeah, I'm cute, And so we do that. We, because if we don't do it, literally no one else will, right? So I want them to know I love you as much as you love me. Yeah. So that's what the art is.
I think there's some questions in the back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, Dr. Jeffers and Dr. Perry. I was interested in something you said at the beginning of the conversation. You said, I've been reared. I don't think you used the word reared, but I've been cared for. I understand that Black women and then you only mentioned Baldwin. You're like, and Baldwin, and then Black women. Mm-hmm. Can you speak as to why Baldwin? Because there's a legacy of Black male writers, whether they are queer or not. But you specifically mentioned Baldwin as the only person that could understand. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Well, I grew up reading Richard Wright. I grew up reading Ralph Ellison. My father was, I think he was only the second Black full professor at North Carolina State University, okay? And he loved the Russians, but he also really, I read all of these people. Mama was the one that introduced me to Hurston. Mama was the one that introduced me to Alice Walker. But so there are so many Black male writers that I love, but I think James Baldwin had a tenderness.
Yeah, because he took care of his younger siblings, right? He was a caretaker.
He had a tenderness for Black women. And there are all these like little letters that they have, you know, and I don't want to be essentialist and say all queer Black men love Black women, but I have queer Black men in my life who just, Jericho Brown, for one, love him strong, you know, and he loves Black women, and sometimes he'll ask me to read things for him on the phone, you know, and he'll be like, girl, you know, and the way he says it, you know. So I think that because James Baldwin loved Black women, there's a piece in the book about when I met him.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you. When I met him as a young girl, and I had
Smiles. Oh, yeah, sorry. I just
What'd you
remember
say?
you talk about how he looked over. He would look. He was smiling
he looked at me like, I know you shame to say stuff, but I'm gonna include you, you know, and so there's a feeling in his work that resonates like the Black women writers that I can't, you know how you want to be able to say it in a fancy way, right? But there's just like a feeling to his work that is deeply tender and female, you know, like that reminds me of the tenderness of Black women. That is one thing, but I think about how Toni Morrison eulogized him. I mean, the Black women just loved them some James Baldwin. They just love some James Baldwin. And so, you know, his work wasn't perfect. Sometimes, you know, the gender stuff, but you felt like his heart was in the right place. But I mean, I write for Black women. You know, Love Songs is a Black feminist novel. This is a Black feminist book. You know, the brothers have enough people who are, you know, pick-me's. You know, I mean, they got enough people. Black men. I mean, if I see one more sister, Black men's health, I'm like, girl, you ain't said one word about reproductive justice on the Facebook. Let these Black men start looking after each other's mental health. Not that I'm not concerned, but the thing is that Black feminists look after everybody. Okay, so I just love them. I mean, what's really interesting, and I hope I'm not sounding diva-fied or, like we say in the South, getting above my raising, but there have been people who have compared my work to Toni Morrison, and that is very flattering, okay? But as I remember, and I've talked about this before, that Mark Anthony Neal had this conversation, you know, on his Left of Black with Liz Wright. And he was saying that people compared Liz Wright to Cassandra Wilson. And she said, I love Cassandra Wilson, but our instruments are so different, right? So Toni Morrison made this conversation possible, okay? But to be honest, I think my work is very similar to James Baldwin because there is a preacher idiom that I will move into as you're like, oh yeah, right. And I'll even say stuff like, I take my text, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's the thing. And I think as a poet, definitely when I'm reading my poetry, even the way I move my body, the way I use my voice, that is something I learned from James Baldwin. The way that he is unabashedly scorching. Like he is scorching.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I love his work. You know, yeah. Thank you for that.
Got time for one more question.
One more question.
Hi, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to listen to you. You had mentioned something earlier about the notion of motherhood and specifically talking about how meaningful it is to include your mother's voice and your personal relationship with her. And I would love if you could speak a little bit more about what is the notion of motherhood and how that helps you pass through the crossroads.
Ooh, sister, that's deep. Well, I would not pretend to know what the notion of motherhood is because I'm not a mother, okay? But what I do know is, and I used to say this to my students all the time, a woman is as close to God, a person, okay, is as close to God as possible when they are carrying a child, okay? That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is that there is a thin veil between life and death when a person is giving birth, okay? And that notion of creation and connection to death, to me, is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So one of the things that when I think about my mother, with all that happened between us, I am the writer that I am because she gave me the language. Her vowels perch on my tongue, okay? Her storytelling. So we were up in the green room and I was doing my thing, right, and someone said, oh, you're a storyteller. Trelly Lee could tell a story. She could hold you in the palm of her hand. My father was an intellectual. Mama was an intellectual, but she was quiet with it. I think about the similarities between her and Lucille Clifton. People have this attitude, they're like, oh, Lucille Clifton is simple poetry. And I'm like, you a fool, because you will get a 19-word Lucille Clifton poem that you have to have all kinds of access to American history before you even enter the body of the poem, right? And so for me, there is, I think, maternity, and then there's mothering, right? And I wasn't always mothered, but I know that every gift that I have came from Mama. And I'm not, that's not like me being corny or, blah, 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 blah. And, my forgiveness did not, even though, as I say, I am a pro-queer, pro-trans, Black feminist Christian, which is like jumbo shrimp. That's an oxymoron, right? But Jesus did not bring me to forgiveness. Love did, okay? And I can't explain it. And I think that's motherhood. Like, I can't explain it because I don't know. I remember asking Mama once, Mama, what did it feel like to have a baby kicking you inside? And all of a sudden, she just, without warning, reached over and punched me in the arm. And she said, like that, but inside your body. And I was like, oh my God, right? So there were these moments, right? The reverence combined with the irreverence is what I got from her, right? You would get that from her, right? But also, I was in the black car thank you, Stephanie Mendoza, my publicist. I was in the book because it was a nice black car. This morning, and this gentleman, he was an elderly gentleman from Thailand. And you know how sometimes you start talking to people, right? And you know you ain't never gonna see them again. And I was saying something about my mom, and he said, your mother was a blessing to this earth, and you bless us by being here. And I was like, oh my God, you know, but that's the thing. She taught me, there's a piece in the book, I won't give away everything, but the day that she taught me compassion. I'll tell this story and then we'll wrap up. I was like 5 or 6 years old. I told this story at Mama's homegoing. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and it was Valentine's Day. And for those of us of a particular age, they used to have these little boxes of the Valentine's Day cards, right? And you would buy the whole box or whatever. So we downtown Durham at the Roses or the Woolworths or something like that. And Mama is fussing, you know, because Daddy was cheap. So she, God bless him, you know, he did his best. And she was like, you know, I don't want to have to buy a second box of these Valentine's Day cards, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I'm, you know, I'm full of my little self. And I say, you don't have to. And she said, yes, we do, baby. Because there are 21 children in your class besides you. And there are only 20 in this box. And I say, well, I'm not going to give Teresa a Valentine's Day card. And she said, why? She said, is she mean to you? You know, that, like that mama bear start coming out. And I said, no, Teresa eats glue. But then, most importantly, I said, and Teresa lives in the projects. So already I had become this little classist asshole, right? This little classist asshole. I'm like, yeah, she lives in Cornwallis Courts, and I'm not, you know, I don't like her because, you know, I was part with the in crowd. I had long hair, and people be stroking my hair, and I was filled, you know, with my little colorist, you know, because even though I was deeply brown, the hair saved me, right? Jesus Christ, right? But you know, these are the things, right? And so, and you know what I love? I love that you and I, as deep Southern sisters, we immediately know what we talking about. So, you know, she said, oh no, you're going to give everybody in the class a Valentine's Day card. So I start breaking food in downtown Durham. Teresa eats glue. Teresa eats glue. And I mean, I'm just going off, you know, da-da-da-da. And I mean, first of all, with a black mama, I'm just shocked. She just didn't whip my ass right there, you know. So she leans down and she takes my little chin in her hand and she said, let me tell you something. If Teresa don't get, and you know, Mama was an English teacher, so when she's breaking a verb, that's a big deal, right? She said, if Teresa don't get a Valentine's Day card, nobody's getting a Valentine's Day card because that is cruel. And I was poor, and she starts going, but of course I'm like 6, so I don't really even know what she's talking about, but she's talking about growing up in poverty. Later, I would understand when she would talk about you know, my grandmother, who was like this genius seamstress, who grandma could go and look at a dress in the window, come home, and make a pattern out of brown paper bags, okay? So grandma would make their clothes out of feed sacks and all of that, and then mom and them, they would be like teased and ridiculed and stuff, right? She's like, that's not happening, right? and I'm just real swole. You know, my little jaws are filled up with wind. And so I go, you know, on Valentine's Day, and I like toss the card onto her. And she said, and I'm gonna call your teacher to make sure that you gave Teresa, so don't even think about it, because trouble is going to happen if I find out Teresa didn't get that card. So I come and I toss it, and then I noticed that nobody else had given Teresa. No one had given Teresa a Valentine's Day card. This is the postscript. Years later, when I had shot up and I was, you know, fat, and I had this bright idea to cut all my hair off, which was my one beauty, you know what I mean? And people were shunning me, right? All those little girls who had shunned Teresa. And we were all together in junior high school, and they had learned how to dress, and you know, now I realize I was neurodivergent, but I didn't know that. I mean, we didn't even have that vocabulary, that language, right? And the only person who would be my friend was Teresa. And I asked her, I said, you know, because I would do those sort of weird, I mean, now I realize it was empathy or something, right? I said, Teresa, why are you my friend? Nobody else likes me. And she reminded me of that Valentine's Day card. And so that's who my mama was. That's who she was. She was a compassionate person. And she taught me to be compassionate. So, there it is.
Don't rush off. Stay. More compassion. Thank you. Thank you for this gift of conversation. Thank you all for honoring us with your presence tonight.
Thank y'all so much for being here.
Glad you're here. Thank you, Friends at Brooklyn Org, for hosting. So please, let's stay and continue the conversation. Good evening.